Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased to have Dr. Abby Lev on the show. We're here to talk about dating trends during coronavirus. She is a psychotherapist and coach. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Well, this is a fascinating topic, and there's all kinds of wild stuff happening right now. And I think whatever you thought you were doing, it's like every aspect of your life has probably changed at this point, including dating. So let's just start with, before we get into the subject itself, I'd love to start with your background, sharing a little bit about yourself and how you got to be a psychotherapist and coach.
Yeah, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist and I have a group practice in the Bay Area. So I run the Bay Area CBT Center, and we used to do mainly therapy face to face, but now we're doing teletherapy and online therapy because of this situation. And given the circumstances of the situation, I also started cbtonline.com because that has resources for people to be able to do worksheets and videos and do kind of cognitive behavioral therapy without a therapist. They could find a therapist on there, but they could also do certain worksheets and stuff like that on their own. And what got me started into therapy is just my own, I guess, existential angst, my own desire to know what makes people happy, what gives people meaning and purpose, what is life about, what is meaningful. And I was very curious about people and human behavior and what works for them and what might work for me. And that curiosity made me want to learn about human behavior and study psychology. And it's a lot of fun. I think I enjoy it a lot.
That's great. So I have a couple other questions, comments about that. But for those who aren't familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short, can you just kind of sum up what that is?
Yeah, I would say that cognitive behavioral therapy is more active and more directive than, we'll say, psychodynamic therapy. And so it looks at your thoughts, your feelings, how they impact your behavior. And there's a lot of techniques and exercises. So you may do role plays, you may learn nonviolent communication skills or mindfulness or emotion regulation. So it's a lot more, there's a lot more techniques. It's very active. It's about changing your behaviors and looking at what are the barriers that stop you from doing new behaviors. So I would say that
So powerful.
very, very, very helpful and
Yeah.
powerful. I think the main notion is that, psychodynamic therapy is based on insight, and that if you gain enough insight, then your behaviors will change. Whereas cognitive behavioral therapists don't believe that insight alone helps you change behaviors, right? There's so many things you're
Yeah,
aware
I
of.
would say I don't think that, like, yeah, you could logically, analytically know you need to do X, Y, Z, but that's not necessarily enough to make you do that.
That's exactly it. How many things are
Yeah,
we aware that we need to stop and we keep doing, right?
right. Yeah, like you logically know, oh, this smoking is not good for me, or this is a codependent pattern or whatever, but that's not the same thing as stopping.
That's exactly it. And that's why I think CBT is very powerful, because it really helps you work with the barriers and help you. There's certain techniques that are very helpful in helping people get out of those barriers and really change habits, build new patterns in their life.
Yeah, I think the pattern, the mental thought process, all that is like so key to changing your life. If you can change your thoughts and keep yourself going down into like a negative mental spiral and then a negative behavioral pattern, then that's like almost everything. And I love, I just want to say it's so interesting because I love psychology. And when I was in college, I almost majored in psychology, but instead I majored in theater and did acting, which is, I think, it's kind of like doing your own work in a way on yourself. But I've always been fascinated with psychology. And now, not that I am obviously a psychologist, but doing the spiritual work that I do as a psychic, there's definitely similarities. I'm just kind of, I think I'm approaching things from a different perspective.
For sure. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I also studied theater my first year
Oh my
of school.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's so we both did we did chose the other path, but we both did that.
And I did some drama therapy for a while. I learned some drama therapy techniques. And so it's very interesting to think about that, right? Like improv is a form of
Yeah.
therapy, right?
Oh my gosh, you
And
have to do so much work when you're doing that. Totally. I did improv for years and years. Yeah.
right, right. And so I think that there's definitely a lot of kind of drama and drama therapy techniques in cognitive behavioral therapy because it's a lot more experiential.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, that's very fun. I feel really we're kindred spirits in that way.
Yeah, yeah, that's funny.
So can you just talk a little bit about what is the sort of meat and bones of cognitive behavior therapy? Like, what is the process like?
Well, one thing that I do is I help people identify their core beliefs. And if you go to either cbtonline.com or the Bay Area CBT Center, I have a questionnaire, a schema questionnaire. And schemas are core beliefs in relationships. And if you
Mm,
take this questionnaire, you'll get a lot of information about how you are in relationships. And what's very interesting about this questionnaire is that if I have a couple and they both of them email me the questionnaires, both of their questionnaires, and I look at them at the questionnaire before meeting the couple, I have a very, very good sense of what their relationship looks like, what are the patterns, where are they stuck, because
yeah,
this
that makes
this
sense.
yeah, the questionnaire tells us core beliefs in relationships. Like, for example, if you have an abandonment schema, you tend to feel abandoned in relationships, or there's a mistrust abuse schema where you feel mistrustful, or an entitlement schema, a self-sacrifice schema. Self-sacrifice is very common for women. There's a subjugation schema where you kind of subjugate your own feelings and needs in relationships. And what happens is that our core beliefs often lead to automatic thoughts and feelings and sensations, like a whole experience when we're triggered. And we tend to do a very conditioned behavior that we've learned to do that maybe in the past has helped us. But now as adults, the behavior that we tend to do when we get triggered, when our core beliefs are triggered, ends up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Totally.
like, yeah, like if somebody's afraid of being abandoned, and then when their abandonment schema is triggered, if they start over texting and seeking reassurance and right accusing, if they start doing those behaviors, you're actually pushing your partner away. And you end
Right.
up causing the very same thing that you fear in your relationships.
I think this is huge, and I think we all, on some level, know that we're doing this, but it's very hard to fight the pattern. So, in my example, I, was born into an abusive situation with my father. We left my father when I was young, but like I know I have so much deep stuff that I've been working on to clear so many different patterns about that. And even when you could be consciously aware of it, and then still be making unconscious choices that are super self-destructive.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to believe that we could make most of our unconscious destructive choices more conscious, right?
Yeah.
Like the more that we learn about it and practice mindfulness about it, I hope that we could have more control over our behaviors, right? Not so much over the experience, we'll still always get triggered, but hopefully we could learn to have more control over our behaviors. And mindfulness
Yeah.
certainly helps with that.
I think so. I mean, I've through various different, I have gone to counseling several times, and I've worked on different spiritual shifts and things. And I think I've certainly improved my pattern, but I still notice, there's that thing coming up again. Like, and I definitely think it's a process. And I'm curious, just you said these schemas and things, like when you look at, people's schemas, are there, where maybe they're in such a different pattern that you right away are like, oh, this is probably not going to be an aligned relationship? Or do you think even regardless, there are things that can be worked through?
I think there are always things that can be worked through. The main question is whether you have two willing participants.
That's so important. Yeah.
It may seem like they're willing participants. Just because they're coming into therapy doesn't mean that they're really willing participants, if you know what I mean. You have to
Oh,
be willing,
totally.
right? You have to be willing to, see your core beliefs and how they impact you and what behaviors you do, and acknowledge the behaviors that are right causing problems and the behaviors that you want to work on, and clarify your values and what you want to be about. You have to be an active participant in changing the dynamic in the relationship. And so when you have a willing participant, you can work through a lot in relationships. And when you have an unwilling participant, somebody who may say, sure, I'll do this, or sure, I'll do that, but then they don't, then it doesn't matter how aligned you are, right? If they're not willing.
I think that's a really good point, because I think what trips a lot of people up is they're with someone who says that they're willing to, like they're going to therapy, they're maybe in a way seeming to make an effort, but they're not willing to change certain behaviors or acknowledge them, or whatever. And then it's just like hitting your head against the wall in a way.
It is. It's exactly like hitting your head against the wall. And I have a lot of strategies to help partners assess whether their partner is a willing participant or not. Like for example, it's very helpful to be very flexible with our wants, with what we request from our partner, but we don't want to be flexible with our underlying needs. Like if I have an underlying need for affection, I could ask, would you be willing to give me a hug? And they could say, no. Would you be willing to give me a kiss? No. Would you be willing to hold my hand? No. Would you be willing to rub my back? But I could be very flexible. You don't want to be stuck with what you want. You don't want to go, I want a hug. Just give me a hug, right? Just give me a hug. But if you could understand and label the underlying need, you could stay very rigid about that. Like it's non-negotiable. Your priorities of your underlying needs are non-negotiable, but you become more flexible in the ways that you could get that underlying need met. And if you have a partner that's not willing to meet the underlying need, not necessarily the wants, but it's not meeting the underlying need, then you probably don't have a willing participant.
How do you differentiate between a want and an underlying need? Because I feel like that could be challenging.
Yeah, an underlying need is more general, and a want is a very specific way to get that need met. So under every negative or positive emotion, we have underlying needs. So if I'm feeling, so our emotions could give us a lot of information about our underlying needs. Like if I feel lonely, I probably have a need for connection or affection. If I feel irritable, maybe I have a need for solitude, or maybe I have a need for collaboration or cooperation. But every single feeling that we have gives us information about underlying needs. And underlying needs can be something like, I need consistency, honesty, reciprocity, collaboration, empathy, compassion. And so there's many, many ways to meet each of these needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. One of the questions I have is, how do you determine what is, something that when someone isn't fulfilling a need versus there's a deeper issue here that I need to shift or work on myself? Because I think one of the things that's coming with coronavirus is we're really being called to work on ourselves, fix, kind of heal things, maybe not be as external as we used to be, and
Right.
work more internally. And so that's just a feeling, kind of sense I have. But that's hard. And how, I feel like sometimes people are, instead of addressing maybe how they feel about themselves, or, working on their own self-talk, patterns, behaviors, they're looking to get that feeling from someone else. So how do you differentiate between, like, I'm misplacing, like I'm trying to get all my satisfaction from this other person, versus that person really isn't honoring my needs?
Yeah, I'll try and answer your question. And then if I'm not being specific enough, maybe
Sure.
you'll give me a specific example and I can answer it in more detail. But I think what you're asking is, we all know that, for example, nobody could meet all of our needs at 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't have all of our needs met all of it 100% of the time and 100% of our needs. So we have to be able to notice a difference between when something feels tolerable, acceptable, versus intolerable, right? We have an ideal situation. Our ideal is like, I would like to go to Mexico, right, this Friday with $100 million, right? We have our ideal.
Right.
And then we have intolerable. It's intolerable for me to be trapped and not be able to travel for more than a month now, right? So we have to know what is intolerable and what is our ideal. And when we know both people's underlying needs, we could usually, I'm a firm believer that we could usually reach win-win agreements where
Mm,
neither partner necessarily gets their ideal situation, but neither partner falls into an intolerable situation.
mm.
And
Yeah, I mean, I understand that, but I'm talking about more as how do you determine when there's just, wow, I just am really looking for too much from someone else, and I need to figure out how to resolve that myself.
I would say there's no such thing as needing too much. I would say
Mm.
as long as we're willing to hear no from our partner, then we could ask for whatever we want. So the difference between a demand and a request is that when we say a request, we say, "Hey, would you be willing to give me a hug?" If the person goes, "No, I'm really tired, my back hurts," and you go, "Okay, I'm disappointed, but that's okay," or maybe you could give me a hug tomorrow, or maybe we could
Mhm.
hold hands. That person just made a request. If the person responds saying something like, "Why are you so selfish? I'm not going to give you a hug. You always do this," with guilt, with shame, with
Well,
punishment,
yeah, that's toxic. Yeah.
then that wasn't a request. It was a demand. If you said, "Would you be willing to do something?" and the person, you're not willing to hear no, you're making a demand. So I would say you could make as many requests as you want. You could make 8 million requests per second if you want, as long as you're willing to hear no from your partner, because your partner decides what their line is, right?
Hmm.
So I don't I
Interesting.
don't I don't believe in too much. I believe there's ineffective ways of doing it, like guilt tripping or demanding, right? There are certain ways to do things that are more effective and less effective. But
Okay, interesting.
but I think you could have as many needs as you want, and then your partner could be willing to meet them or not. And you have to be really clear that you're not going to get your ideal. You're not going to get it at 100%.
Hmm. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the time that we're in right now, because it's a very strange time for so many different reasons. So we were going to talk initially about some of the dating trends, things that are happening right now, and I think it's fascinating. So what are you seeing in this, kind of dating romantic world now that we have these restrictions in place?
I think that, given the circumstances and how difficult it is and what a challenging time we're in, people are feeling a little bit lonelier, a little bit more uncertain. They're taking dating a little bit more seriously. If we think about the way dating used to be before technology, we didn't have certain terms like ghosting and
Mhm.
benching and
Breadcrumbing.
breadcrumbing, right? Like zombieing. I mean, there's all of this terminology that didn't used to exist. And so now that this exists, it's giving us information about what dating is like right now. Like modern dating can be pretty dehumanizing. It's like going to grocery, next, 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 right? And you could just ghost people or bench them, right? It's
What is
become
bench? I've
very,
not heard that one.
um, I'm not sure either, but I think benching is when you kind of tag somebody along, like you don't
Oh,
commit to
maybe they're kind
them,
of
but
like
you
on the
have
bench,
them,
like they're my
they're on the
backup or something.
right, like a backup.
Okay, got it.
Right, right.
Yeah, that feels pretty lame, I'm sure.
It's it has gotten
Yeah.
very dehumanizing. And so it's like you said, this is a time for us to go more inward, to be thinking about what matters, and right, like what are our priorities? What are our values? What do we want to stand for? And what kind of relationship do we want? And so I see people taking it a little bit more seriously and also taking it slower, because I think
Mm.
also modern dating and technology makes it very easy for people to meet a lot of people and very quickly, right? And it moves very quickly in the sense that people want an answer about how compatible they are after date one or date two, which is pretty hard to figure out so quickly. And now that we have this virus, it's very strange, because now that person has to be, you have to be, it's got to be a pretty good person to risk meeting them. Now it's like meeting up with people is almost a risk. It can be dangerous. And so everybody's taking that a little slower. You're getting to know people, you're doing things on Zoom, you're getting more creative with dating. So people are doing a lot of interesting things through video conferencing, but there's a lot more time for them to get to know each other and have a compatibility, not just based on attraction or chemistry, but more with substance and core values and what that person is about.
Yeah, it's a interesting time, and I think there's also, if you're in a relationship, it's bringing up a lot of, stressors, maybe. And also depending on whether you have kids or not, there's all of a sudden you're like have your kids all the time, and people trying to share the same space, and maybe financial stresses. So if you're really feeling pressure during this time, do you have any tips you can give for people trying to manage their relationship with all these new stresses that they're probably not used to dealing with?
Yeah, I would say the number one thing if you're in a relationship is to not forget the context. So don't be too quick to assume that the negative feelings you're having are related to the relationship or
Totally.
are a reflection of the relationship. If you don't,
Yeah.
if you're not in the mood to have sex, if you're wanting more alone time, you're feeling more irritable with your partner, I wouldn't start kind of thinking about, well, what does this mean about our relationship? And maybe this isn't working. I would just go, hey, we're in the middle of a global pandemic crisis. So you're not going to be your best self and your partner is not this isn't the norm. So I would say
Right.
practicing a lot of self-compassion, and other compassion, and really staying with remembering the context, and saying things like, it makes sense that I'm feeling irritable, and it makes sense that I feel uncertain. It makes sense that I feel less connected. It makes sense that I'm not in the mood to have sex, or it makes sense that I want to have sex all the time. Whatever it is that you're having, where we're going, this crisis is like a grief, right? We're all grieving.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's really important to acknowledge. And whether it's conscious or not, it's like a major trauma in a way that everyone's going through. And then we're grieving maybe literally the loss of people, maybe the loss of our career, maybe the loss of, situations, lifestyle. And that's a tough thing. In a way, I think this is probably certainly collectively the hardest thing we've gone through together, as a world. And for a lot of people, this may be the hardest thing they've gone through in their life, and it's all happening right now.
I can't think of anything in my lifetime that's been more intense than this collectively, right? I
Yeah,
mean, this is
collectively for
right.
sure.
It's a huge trauma. I would use the word trauma for sure.
Yeah, I think it's really important to acknowledge that, because I feel like it's easy to be kind of dismissive of it, or to just kind of look at it logically, but not really understand the emotional aspects. And so I really liked what you said about not automatically saying, oh, that's, that's the relationship, or that's this person when you're having an issue, because this is like unprecedented what we're all going through. And yeah, when we're under stress, we're never our best. And I think one of the things I've gotten psychically is just, it's really important to have compassion, to release judgment as much as we can. And I see this happening, for example, on social media, as people kind of like attacking each other because they have different responses to what's happening,
Right.
and also even assessing the situation, how bad is this from a pandemic perspective, governments, all there's, and people getting really vicious with each other. And I just think, it's easy to put out our stress and frustrations and kind of attack another person or put it on that person, instead of just like, okay, I need to step back and just kind of do something that helped me de-stress.
Right. I think there's two important points that you made there. One is that when it comes to trauma, most of the time we don't actually notice it when it's happening, right? It's like a post thing. It's like we're looking back, right? Like PTSD
Right.
is post-traumatic stress. So often we don't even realize in the moment, whoa, this is really traumatic. I may not be having the symptoms of trauma right now, because in the middle of trauma, we tend to dissociate a bit. We're coping.
Right.
And so later we go, oh, now I'm having nightmares. Oh, now I'm having the repercussions, and now I'm hypervigilant, and now I'm washing my hands all the time, right? So it is really important that we do acknowledge that this is a trauma, and that it has implications on our behaviors and how we're going to be now and in the future.
Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, and the second thing that you said also is this idea of how easy it is if when we have difficult feelings or an experience that it's easy for us to blame someone, right? Like who's at fault? Why am I feeling bad? And when you're
Yeah.
stuck with somebody during a global pandemic, it's very easy to just make them at fault.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely. The other piece that I've gotten here, which I think is important to acknowledge, is when all of this is happening, it's like it's not great to judge how someone else is processing that trauma, right? Because I think one of the things I see happening is like, okay, I'm going through this and how I react is XYZ. And someone else is doing ABC, and I'm going to be angry with them for doing that. So fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever some people are, when you look at this from the sort of global perspective, they might be uh, maybe in a way running, like they are pulling in, they don't want to go out, they don't want to associate with anyone. And then other people are freezing, other people they're like fighting, they want to go out, they're fighting for their rights or whatever it is that they feel like they're fighting. And what I see is people attacking other people for doing a different approach instead of saying like, look, we all are just kind of handling this as best as we can.
Right. Well, that's a big reason why when I was saying to label your feelings and then say it makes sense that I feel this, it makes sense that I need this, it makes sense that she needs this, or it makes sense that he feels this, is exactly getting to the point that you're making, that grief manifests in so many different ways, and it's all normal. Like we don't have a protocol like for a global pandemic. We don't. What's the right way to respond to a global
No,
crisis?
even experts are disagreeing.
Right.
So, and then they're also changing their mind. They're saying, don't wear a mask. Okay, wear a mask. I mean, so, even the same person is kind of, going back and forth, or the same group, CDC, the WHO, whatever. So I think it's really important that we have kindness, compassion, and not be judging as much as we can. I mean, I think sometimes it ends up feeling like an outlet where people are so frustrated and they just like pour their anger at this, entity or other person or whatever, but that's not really productive.
Right. I mean, I also want to acknowledge that that right now politically we have a lot of
Yeah.
polarization. I don't think if this would be feeling the same if this was happening under Obama. We didn't have alternative facts back then and fake news, and we were living in a bit of a different world than we are now.
Oh, totally.
And so that also increases our trauma response, because
Yeah.
we don't know what to believe and what's true and what are facts and what are alternative facts, and that makes the trauma even worse. And
Yeah.
you're right, there's a lot of polarization that people are doing against each other because of the political climate.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely see that. And it is interesting because a lot of my big sort of realignment shifts happened during the recession. So I lost my marriage, my job, my career, livelihood, house, all my money. I was sick. Like everything was just terrible, right?
Wow.
And everything, it was like a bulldozer's like, and just cleared everything out. And in a way, it felt like the worst thing in the world, but actually everything that was cleared was like for the best for me. So I just want to say that if things seem really horrible, a lot of times it's because there's this major realignment shift happening, but it doesn't feel good in the moment. So I'm not saying that like, hey, this is going to feel awesome. It's probably going to feel like it sucks. But that doesn't mean that what's coming isn't better.
And I think what you're speaking to is a term that now is being written about called post-traumatic growth. So
Yes.
in trauma, we could develop a disorder and get PTSD and get post-traumatic stress disorder, or like what you're saying, if we look inward, if we grow from it, if we progress, if we learn about our needs and our
Yeah.
feelings and our values, then there's a huge amount of potential for growth.
Yeah, I really feel that. And so, again, I have so much compassion for everything that everyone's going through. And I'm an empath, so I literally, I feel it. But just that there is so much that can happen on the positive side. And I really do see there's going to be some wonderful things. I mean, we're already seeing in terms of ecologically just how the earth is healing. And I think there's shifts that ultimately are going to be really good for society. Like, hey, do we really need to be in a car and create all this pollution for 2 hours a day in order to go to a job, or can we do this remotely? I'm very glad that there's a lot of things that are shifting to online, because there's many times when I wanted to do online, but it hasn't been an option. And now that's going to be more available. And I think, so again, so many silver linings, but that doesn't mean that it's not hard, because when these changes happen, it's not immediate. It takes us a while, and then we do have to mourn. So when I went through all those changes, I felt like I was in mourning for the life that I thought I was going to live. Like,
Right.
it wasn't even, I mean, yes, I definitely mourned the loss of the marriage and my job and things like, but it was more like, oh my God, that future that I thought I was going to have is definitely not happening. And that was, I
Right.
think, my biggest grieving. So I feel like that's probably happening for a lot of people right now, where they're really grieving their what they thought their future was going to be.
Right. Right. I think it's even more traumatic because we don't know exactly the changes that are going to be
What it's going to
occurring. We
be.
we don't
Yeah.
know what our new, so it's even scarier because the new norm is we have no idea what that is. Are we going to never travel again? Are we going to travel again in a year? Or are we not going to have concerts for a year or 5 years? We don't know. Our concert's going to look completely different for the rest of our lives. So
Right.
we're grieving all of these things we used to have, but we don't even know which ones we'll still have and which ones will radically change. It's very
Yeah.
uncertain times.
Yeah, I agree. And some of these things happened during the recession with the housing market falling, and but it was a very much a smaller percentage of the population. And these has way more, massive implications. So do you have any suggestions as a psychotherapist for if you're just feeling just maybe hopeless, overwhelmed, how do you just cope and not go down that downward spiral?
Yeah, I would say that I'm going to say a similar thing that I said with the dating or with being with your partner is you have to remember the context and lower your expectation and your standards for yourself. You can't be expecting yourself to be functioning at the same level during a global pandemic as you did before. So being like really kind and gentle with yourself, like
Oh, yeah.
it's just new standards. Like if you woke up, if you showered, if you changed, if you ate, if you did some work, like you've won. There's no need to feel like you got to change the world and be really productive and do this and just survive, just do the best that you can, and then really acknowledge that that's hard right now. And I love self-compassion exercises. I have some
Yeah.
on my website. And Kristen Neff does self-compassion, and she's great. And you do certain exercises where you take your hand and you put it on your heart, and you may even take your other hand and kind of rub it gently and say things like, it makes sense that this is really hard, or may I feel calm and may I be safe. It makes sense that I'm needing connection. It makes sense that I'm feeling lonely. It makes sense that I'm anxious. So being really loving and kind, talking to ourselves as we would, a mom talking to a baby, right? Being really
Oh,
kind, being really soft.
yeah. Right. No, I think that's really important. And because we're maybe not, like you said, even kind of mentally processing that trauma, we don't even realize that we're experiencing that trauma or how traumatic it actually is. And we may not realize it till we look back on it. That, yeah, we should be really kind. And also just understand to ourselves and to others, and also understand that everyone is at a different place with this. For some people, this is an opportunity to go within. Maybe it is an opportunity to do a creative project and kind of do inner healing and, go out and walk with their dog or whatever. And other people, they're suddenly thrown into, okay, I don't have any money. I'm having to take care of my child and we don't have space. And, some people are maybe losing their homes. Like, everyone has a different set of circumstances. And that's not to say that it's not challenging for all of us, but just wherever you are, don't judge other people for not being there. So, like, if you are really struggling just to get out of bed or, basic things, please don't judge other people who are not in that place, and vice versa. right?
Right,
That
right.
we have a different set of circumstances, and this is coming up and manifesting differently for us. So I think it's important to have compassion for ourselves and for others, and not judge them because they're not in the same boat, literally, during this time.
Yeah, I think too, for the people like empaths, for example, can
Hmm.
really be a little spongy and
Oh
take
yeah.
on other people's feelings. So it's really important not to judge other people for their own experiences or their own way of coping through this trauma. But
Yeah.
it's also really important for you to be very clear on what your feelings are and what your needs are, what your boundaries are, what your own limits are.
Yeah.
Sometimes we become judgmental because we're not actually taking care of ourselves. Maybe if your partner is like not getting out of bed and you're feeling like you want to take a walk, you don't have to sit there and judge them. You could just go and take a walk,
Take
right?
care of what you need. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. I was just doing a podcast with an astrologer, and it was so funny. I'm if you follow astrology, I'm an astrology Gemini cusp, and he's like, basically, if you're not in alignment, then that when then that Taurus side will come out, and you'll just be like, I'm gonna hurt you, like, if you don't say the right thing or whatever. And so I think that's happening for a lot of us. We're like getting so angry, or we could be so angry, and we're like targeting it, but it's like, oh, that just means we probably need more self-care. We need to take care of ourselves more. If you're really angry, it's like, okay, what do I need? Kind of redirect that, and what can I do for myself as well?
Right. Because all your feelings give you information about what you're needing. If you're angry, maybe you need respect, or maybe you need some space, or maybe you need
Yeah.
exercise, but it's giving you information about what you're needing. I think,
Yeah.
anytime we're kind of trapped in something or we're forced to do something we don't want to do, it feels worse, right? Like
Yeah.
I love cake. I love dessert. I could eat it all day long if I chose to. But if somebody was telling me, like, we're driving to this factory and there's going to be a lot of dessert there and you have to eat every single dessert there, you can't leave any of it, I will no longer desire it. I'd just be like, oh, I don't know that I want all this dessert.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it is being in quarantine. You're stuck with somebody that if you were choosing to be there, you'd probably really love them and see them with gratitude, but you're stuck with that person. It's no longer a choice. And so as soon as we no longer view it as a choice, it starts feeling more frustrating and more trapping than, right? It kills desire.
Yeah. And I imagine too, there's also an associative thing that happens, like starting to associate, you know, maybe your family, your partner, or whatever, with all the negativity that's cropping up right now. Instead of like, okay, this is not about that person or situation, but rather, again, just this really intensely traumatic situation that's happening. And one of the things I found is I definitely uh, feel better when I get off of social media and don't watch the news. I feel like that really triggers a lot of fear with people.
I think you're making an interesting point, which is similar to the blaming others, that our minds are evolutionarily designed to come up with stories, even when something is
Mm,
not connected or related, right? It's like a
yes,
way
yes.
to keep us safe. If I just figure out why I got abandoned, it won't happen again. Or if I could figure out, how to not have my partner make me feel like this again. And so we concoct a lot of stories and we have to hold them very lightly. If we buy
Mm,
into a lot of stories right now, you're right, they're going to impact our behaviors and we may act out of alignment with our own values and the kind of partner that we want to be.
I love that. No, I think that's really important to think about, because the stories are really just made up most of the time. But yeah, you're right. I think it's a pattern. It's a thing that we've learned to survive, of noticing a pattern, and then we can prevent, okay, that's a snake, that pattern is dangerous, okay, see that snake, I'm gonna like be safe. But we create those now, and because the
Right.
danger is often not real, it's in our minds. And so then, like, it's this, like you said, this I think you said it before, this self-replicating kind of prophecy, because we're expecting it and therefore creating it in our life.
That's exactly it. These stories are usually concocted out of our core beliefs. So they're a
Yeah.
little tainted, right? They're conditioned. And the story is, like you said, we're very adaptive evolutionarily. So if I saw a tiger and I see these big teeth, right, and this fur, it makes sense that then I'm going to be afraid of a wolf, and then I'm going to be afraid of a bear, and then I'm going to be afraid of, a fox or anything that looks similar to this. And that's very
Right.
advantageous. But you're right. Nowadays, if we get held up at gunpoint at McDonald's, it doesn't help us to then avoid McDonald's and then avoid Burger King and then avoid French fries and then avoid burgers. Right? It doesn't help us in the same way. But
Right.
the mind wants to make sense of the nonsensical, right? Our minds are constantly wanting to find a pattern. Our minds think they're like statisticians when we're not good statisticians, our minds.
Oh, yeah, I think that's a really, really good point. And when you look at this from coronavirus, you see this with all these they're trying to make projections and the numbers, and like the numbers aren't reliable, and some people are using these numbers and some people are using these numbers. And I what I've just gotten psychically is like that is just, it's not helpful because we don't even know what we're looking at, and we're trying to maybe create and recognize patterns that aren't even, it's like not right, or we're only looking at part of the data because we don't have it yet because it's being created right now. So that's the other piece I've gotten is it's hard because our minds want to try to figure it out, like kind of problem solve, but the truth is we really can't right now. We don't
Right.
have enough information. We're just kind of in a holding pattern while we get enough information.
And our minds always want certainty. They want things to be certain. And sometimes our minds would rather blame ourselves and have certainty than sit in uncertainty.
Yeah.
We would just go, I'm at fault.
Or someone
I'm
else.
not good enough. Right.
It's
or
that person's
else.
fault. It's that political leader. It's the media.
Right.
It's, this, my boyfriend. It's, whatever that is, your child,
Yeah. Because it's
your parent.
It's like a relief from this very, unbelievably painful experience of such ungroundedness, such uncertainty, such unpredictability. It's a very deeply painful experience we're feeling right now. So again, how do we let go of the story and hold the stories that our mind throws at us very lightly and come back to what does it feel like in our body? Where is this experience in our body? What are we feeling? What are we needing? And coming back and putting our hand on our hearts and being really just kind and gentle with our feelings and our needs and other people's feelings and needs.
I think that's so powerful. And again, going back to the idea of thinking about when someone's gone through something very obviously traumatic. So an accident, a car accident, or, some kind of attack or something. Think about how much gentleness you would give to that person or to yourself if you'd gone through that. And I think we need to all to basically be handling it that way right now.
Right.
Extra sleep, eating really healthy food, giving ourselves nurturing. I've had, times recently where I had one night where I slept like 10 hours and then I still felt exhausted. And then I slept 3-hour nap, definitely not normal for me. I normally sleep like, maybe 7 hours and I feel awesome. But we are collectively going through so much processing emotionally, mentally, life changes. And so it's just really important to honor our need for rest. And by the way, when you rest, that's also when your immune system is the strongest. So like, please do that for multiple reasons. Can you talk about that? Our need, like what we need to process? Because I feel like I'm certainly needing that, just like way more rest, more downtime than I normally would.
That is a thing. People are saying that people are much more tired right now, more tired, needing more rest, needing more sleep. And even with sleep, still feeling tired.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly why it is, but I'm sure it's a mixture of not being around people as much and having the same repetitive thing happening over and over again, being in front of a computer a lot more often than we're used to.
I think for a lot of people, that's true. Mm-hmm.
And probably not being out in the sun as much, right? I mean, there's all of these pieces to it. And the fact that it's a trauma and it's like the world is radically different and there's all this uncertainty. It takes a lot of energy to just cope with all of this. And so
absolutely.
It makes sense to be feeling a lot of things right now. It makes sense to be tired. It makes sense to be irritable. It makes sense to be depressed. It makes sense to be anxious. It makes sense to even be feeling better, to be relieved, to feel, normalize. If a lot of my clients who've already struggled with anxiety or OCD symptoms are feeling very normalized right now, they're like, oh, this is how I've always been, how everybody's feeling this.
That's so interesting. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do think that our emotions are coming up for addressing, to also to honor it, and this issue of just kind of shoving things down, like that isn't, that isn't helpful. And I think that some of these things are things that have been in society for a while, and it's whatever is underneath coronavirus and the situation is just bringing it up like really strong. And so in a
Right.
way, this is an opportunity for us to really address whatever is going on for us in our life, because it's just, we're in a way, we're just on pause, and these things are being highlighted. So it can be very challenging and painful, but I really do feel like there can be so much growth that comes from this.
I think one thing that this virus has certainly highlighted is that we're all interdependent, and we are
Oh
dependent
yeah.
on each other, whether we like it or not. Somebody in Wuhan, China could do a behavior that impacts me and everybody in the world.
Yeah.
We'd like to, act like we're so independent, or we're so self-reliant, we don't need anybody. But we're social creatures. We're collaborative by nature. We're altruistic by nature. And so having this excessive autonomy doesn't work very well. It's very isolating and lonely. And so
Yeah.
we're getting a taste of that, of how interdependent we really are.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, gosh, this has been so interesting. I love everything you do. I think that this is definitely going to help people with some different approaches to handle this. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we finish up for today?
No, not really. I had a lot of fun. This was really interesting and very nice. Yeah, I enjoyed this.
Thank you. Me too. If people want to learn more or connect with you, if you could once again give, your website, any free resources, social media handles, whatever you'd like to give out.
There's cbtonline.com, where you could get a lot of CBT resources and videos and audio mindfulness. And there's Bay Area CBTcenter.com. And right now, both of them are just doing teletherapy and online therapy until we get more information about this pandemic and get to
So
see people in person.
one of my questions, because I don't know if this has changed since all this started, but are you allowed to see people, wherever they are in the United States and other countries, other states, or how is that working?
Psychotherapists can only work with people who are they're licensed in the same state that the person lives. Coaches could see. So I also have a coaching certificate, and I'm a psychotherapist. So coaching you could do anywhere. Psychotherapy only in the state that you live in. And right now, all of us have been just doing online work until this gets figured
Yeah.
out.
I really hope that even continues to open up even more, just because I feel like, just great when we can all connect with each other. But I'm glad to hear you can coach with whoever, because so if someone's listening, I have clients all over the world, and it's so nice to be able to connect with each other regardless of those, physical locations.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right? Where we're all
Exactly.
so isolated. It's good to
Hmm.
be able to reach out.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Abby. It's really a pleasure to connect with you, and wishing all of you well, you yourself, your practice, and everyone in the Bay Area. I do love that part of the country very much. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me at Twitter at that Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook at Healing Powers.